Welcome, everybody, to the HPA Tech Retreat UK TRX preview. The TRX is titled The Reality of Virtual, Augmented, and Mixed Realities. Speakers today are Nick Mitchell, Vice President, Immersive Technology at the Technicolor Experience Center, Richard Welsh, co-founder and CEO of Sundog Media Toolkit Limited, and Mary-Luc Champel, Standards Director at Technicolor. He's Requirements Working Group Chair for the VR Industry Forum, as well as co-chair for MPEG-I at MPEG. And without further delay, I will turn the floor over to Mr. Richard Welsh, SMPTE's Education Vice President and Program Chair for TRX.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this TRX preview. I hope that you're going to find the next half an hour, 45 minutes or so, both informative, educational and fun. And that's something that we really believe in at HPA. And the Tech Retreat events, if you're not familiar with them, are great learning and networking experiences that we hold annually, one in Palm Springs in February and one in Oxfordshire in the UK in July. So this year's event is from the 11th to the 13th. And on the 11th, we'll be having our TRX half a day, which is an afternoon focusing on a particular topic that's really hot in the industry. And this year, we're looking at virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, and the practical challenges with getting that content made and out there to consumers. So this TRX preview will hopefully give you a flavour of what we'll be talking in much more depth about at the event. I encourage you to go to hpaonline.com to have a look at our programme for the whole 3 days of the conference, which I'm sure you'll find is full of intriguing topics. And so the TRX will be on the 11th in the afternoon, and it will be chaired by Nick Mitchell, who's already been introduced by Joel. So without more ado, I'd like to hand over to Nick, who will introduce this session.
Thanks, Rich. Hi, everybody. I'm Nick Mitchell. As I said, I'm working with the Technicolor Experience Center. This is a new facility for Technicolor based out of the Culver City area. We just opened up on June 15th. The center is designed to facilitate the exploration and showcasing of the technology that Technicolor and our partners produce to serve the immersive space. Technicolor has traditionally done a lot of research and innovation out of their location in Rennes in France, where we have close to 200 researcher scientists. So the tech allows us to collaborate across the multiple different Technicolor business units, including companies like NPC, The Mill, Mr. X, Mikros, and our sort of true Technicolor production services groups to come and explore what immersive technology means to Technicolor as a whole. There's a lot of change in the industry, and we believe that it requires education and partnerships to push things forward. Along those lines, we've hosted more than 300 people in the building since October, had discussions across a number of different adjacent spaces, including those outside of traditional entertainment and media. And we also built a fairly large motion capture stage and a multi-purpose sort of production experimentation space for the Technicolor brands and the third-party companies. There are a number of issues associated with VR still. I come from the cinema industry previously, so I'm used to very high quality images and composition playback, and there are a number of opportunities, I feel, for improving the space of immersive media using some of the lessons learned in other areas, including broadcast and cinema technologies. And we really just want to get people excited about the media and the space so that we can help kind of connect the dots between the people who have provided those solutions in the past and the people who need those solutions today. So we'll have a session that will include discussions with our research and innovation teams to discuss sort of the scale of the effort that we're putting forth, the number of researchers attached to various projects in the space, and information about the associated collaboration efforts across the BUs. You know, one of the big challenges with production and research touching is that they tend to have different impedances, really, where I like to say that research and innovation quantifies things in man years, and production quantifies things in frames. And trying to get those worlds to touch effectively is an interesting challenge, but one that is really something that I enjoy doing very much, because I come from a little bit of both of those backgrounds. So, you know, things, for instance, like compression are really near and dear to my heart. And as you can see, to give you a little bit of a taste of what we'll be discussing in the sessions, we have a little bit of an issue. So I'll go over some of the bitrate things associated with VR, and we'll also have a little bit of an update on where we're at in the standards initiatives associated with the space. We'll also have somebody join us from the Mill in the UK. For those who are not familiar, the Mill is a creative advertising agency that is a company of Technicolor for a few years now, who has done a lot of work in the immersive space, including their project, the Blackbird. So the Blackbird is effectively a rolling motion capture studio, and we use it for the creation of advertisements, automotive advertisements, where we can go and we can shoot the commercial, and then later do a really good job of replacing the Blackbird, which is effectively a stand-in car, using some techniques that we've developed in the Mill. We'll also have some information about our connected home division and the work that we're doing to drive immersive entertainment into the home and beyond. We feel that there's a lot of work to do across the different environments, whether it be sort of your traditional theatrical space, as well as viewing at the home. And our connected home group is doing a lot of work to try and drive those experiences into the living room. So to touch a little bit about, to touch on the bitrate subject a little bit, I wanted to provide a little bit of information about where we're currently at with regards to 360 videos. Along the top here, you can see these are cinema J2K profiles associated with various resolution sets. As everybody may be aware or not, we're still in kind of the 2K and 4K resolution space in cinema. And we have 250 megabits a second to work with in this codec, which provides a very, very good reproduction of the image quality. So as you can see here, we're riding along the average bits per pixel of anywhere between 1 and 2 bits per pixel in the cinema. And what's interesting about that is because we're working in resolutions such as 2048 by 1080, which is 2K, and 4096 by 2160, which is 4K, we have some bits to work with. We have a good level of quality on screen. People are typically pretty happy with the results in a cinema playback presentation. Compared to some of the data below about where we're at with 360 video presentations. And it's important to note here in the bitrate section that we've got that we're talking about a maximum bitrate of about 150 megabits a second. And that's not necessarily even achievable with all of the different pieces of software that are out there today. There's some very, very prevalent software suites that limit H.264, which is the codec that is typically used for the 360 video playback. They cap that at about 50 megabits a second. So even in our best case scenario where we've got a situation that we used some custom code to push the codec to 150 megabits a second, we're suffering from some really serious bit starvation when we start talking about the resolutions that are used for these 360 experiences. And as you can see, they're typically a 1-to-1 ratio. So, the last 360 video that we put out was 4096 by 4096, effectively 4K by 4K pixels. At 150 megabits a second, which again, we had to do a lot of work to force, and we have inconsistent results on playback using this codec. To be 100% honest, we have a 0.3 average bits per pixel, and that is in the best case scenario. And we very regularly have people coming to us saying, well, you know what, I want to future-proof this, so I'd love to put in 8K by 8K or 10K by 10K. And while it sounds like that might be a good idea, because we're still dealing with the same bit rate on the output, which again is sometimes constrained to between 30 and 50 megabits a second, we have a real problem. And I think that this is something that as an industry we can solve, and we're on our way to solving it. And I think that this would be a very good time for me to pass the baton to Marie-Luc, who is heading up our standards activities, to talk about where we're at in the SDOs and the goals that we've got to solve some of these problems.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Hi, everyone. As Nick said, high quality is very important for VR. About 2 years ago, it was clear that technology was needed to improve the quality of VR content. And at the same time, it's a very fragmented market with different technologies. HMDs have their own format. They do not support the same kind of codec profiles and levels. So it was crying for an interoperable format at that time. That's why several SDOs starting to look at VR. And at the HPA Tech, I will mostly focus on what MPEG is doing, because MPEG was the first SDO to really work hard on VR, and MPEG is launching a suite of standards on VR. And also the VR Industry Forum started about 18 months ago with the intention to grow an ecosystem, end-to-end ecosystem for VR production and distribution. The issue of bitrate that Nick has mentioned is here. It's clear. If we want to do high-quality VR, it will be very difficult when you look at these figures. Also, the frame rate is very important. As you know, the motion to photon latency, which is the amount of time the image changes when you move your head, is very important. We want to be able to have up to 90 frames per second, but if we send the whole 360 content, then that's a terrific amount of data that needs to be sent. So this is an issue. In the future, with future networks that can have round-trip delays very short, close to milliseconds or two, it could be possible just to send the visible viewport. But in the meantime, we need to send the whole 4 pi stereogence image to the HMD, because whenever you turn your head, you don't want to see a black screen. So that means we need to send the whole content. If we do it in a blunt way, then we have, I would say, low to medium quality content everywhere. So standards are also looking at how it is possible to send high quality content where I'm looking at, and whenever I'm starting to look somewhere else, then the quality of the content will improve over time, over a few hundred milliseconds, for instance. But that allows saving a lot of bandwidth. So before I dig in what MPEG is doing and the VR Industry Forum is doing, I think it's also very important to discuss about what different kind of VR services we can do. Okay, so maybe you've heard about degrees of freedom, so commonly abbreviated as DAF. This is very important because we have very different kinds of VR services. Nick mentioned the 360 video, which is like the simple VR content today. This is what we usually call 3DAF, so 3 degrees of freedom. This is what you can see here on the left-hand side. Sorry. In a 3DAF use case, the user can move his head along rotational axis, yaw, pitch, and roll movement. So this is a typical use case of a user sitting in a chair, being able to move his head and look at 3D content in an HMD. If we push a little bit further, we have what we call 3DAF Plus, which is an enhancement of 3DAF. By 3DAF Plus, we're bringing a little bit of constrained movements, translational movements around X, Y, and Z axis. The typical use case here is simple. It's still a user sitting in a chair, looking at 360 content in an HMD, but now the user can not only look everywhere, but he can slightly move his head left and right, more forward, backward, up and down. And this is very important because this is what happens in reality. And by doing so, we can also perceive the motion parallax. This is what allows you to see behind objects at close range or mid-range and gives the user the perception of depth. So in terms of immersion, this is really, really important. And then we have a second category of VR services type, which are the 6DAF family, so 6 degrees of freedom. The first one is a Windows 6DAF. In that use case, the user is looking at the VR content through a window, which is in front of him. So that means that there are some constraints on the rotational movement because the user, there is no meaning for the user to look up the window or too far on the side on the window. So there are some rotational movements. And there is one translational movement on the Z-axis because, of course, the user cannot go through the window. But apart from that, the user is looking at the content through the window and can walk around behind the window. The omnidirectional 6DAF, which is the next one, is close to 3DAF plus. It's, again, unlimited rotational and some limited translational. The difference here is that now the user can actually walk a little bit in the content. So it's not only about head movement, it's also about body movements, and the user can have a better immersion in the content. And last but not least, of course, the full 6DAF content, where the user can freely navigate and walk through the content. If we're talking CGI, 6DAF is something that is already achievable today. All the interactive VR content done in CGI today is 6DAF. But if we're talking about video-based content, then the technology for 6DAF is probably around 0.5 point cloud or light field, and I think you all know that it is not mature enough technology today. So now that all these different kinds are understood, I'll show you a little bit about what MPEG is doing in this area. So this is the MPEG timeline. So it's not only just about VR, it's about all MPEG activities. But if you look in this chart, you can see activities such as the omnidirectional media format here, for which the first version is scheduled by the end of this year. You can see immersive media, augmented media, point cloud, light field, new video coding, new audio coding. And all these activities are actually part of a new suite of standards in MPEG called MPEG-I, which is I stands for immersive media. And in MPEG-I, there are actually 3 phases from 2016 to 2019. This is the phase 1, with the phase 1A, which is scheduled to end by the end of this year, that will produce the omnidirectional media application format. And there will be additional work on point cloud, on video coding in the next 2 years as well. And the second phase will look at 6TOF content. So this is all the work on light field, on point cloud, and possibly additional system layers as well. So the MPEG-I is a new suite of standard known as ISO IEC 23090. It's, as its name is saying it, immersive media. This is about the coded representation of immersive media. And today there are at least already 5 parts. It's a multi-part standard. There are already 5 parts that have been identified and started. 1 part on architecture, 1 part on omnidirectional media application framework, which intends to be an interoperable format for 360 VR content. As always with MPEG, there will be 1 part on video coding, 1 part on audio coding. It is clear that the needs that are imposed by VR content in terms of video and audio are very high, and that the existing tools need to be improved to be able to offer high quality for VR content. There is also an activity on the compression of point cloud, because it's clear that use of point cloud will be important. And as I'm writing here as well, there is probably more to come as well. We're already discussing about activities on metrics, activities on generic metadata for VR. Light field also is a hot topic in MPEG. Of course, all these activities do not have the same timeline. For some of them, as I said, the OMAF is really the #1 activity right now in MPEG-I. The draft is currently, the state of this work is currently in draft international standard, which means we are very close to the end, and the goal is to make it public at the end of this year. And next to MPEG, there is also the VR Industry Forum that was first discussed at CES last year and quickly grew, and there is a total of 39 members, I believe, today. And the VR Industry Forum is not an SDO. Its goal is not to produce standards. Its goal is really to build on available specification and possibly recommend selections to SDOs. For instance, in case of the OMAF specification in MPEG, this is a topic on which the VR Industry Forum provided its requirements to MPEG so that the standard can actually meet the requirements of the industry. The VRAF will also produce guidelines on those standards, and those guidelines will be on the production side, but also on the distribution side. There will be guidelines on human factors as well, because you probably know that human factor is a very important topic for VR. High quality content, before all, is a content that doesn't make the user sick, and it's a challenge for VR if the content is not properly done, not properly distributed, and not properly rendered on the HMD, then it can quickly make the user sick. So this is a very important topic. And last but not least, the VR Industry Forum will also work on helping with interoperability testing and demos of VR standards.
So I think that gives a pretty good rundown of the status of things and teases the larger panel and discussion at the HPA session. I hope that gives you guys a little bit of an understanding of where we're at now and where we're hoping to get to.
We'll also be looking at topics such as the intersection of VR and gaming, some experiences there, looking at VR capture for news reporting, also looking at some live VR events that have taken place and how they've handled doing effectively a live multicam broadcast from various different types of event. So there's plenty going on during the TRX, and there will be much more during the 2 days of conference that follow that. So if you're interested in finding out more about it, again, I encourage you to go to hpaonline.com. I think the web links have been posted up already, and I think at this point, Joel, would you like to let us know if we've got any questions from anyone?
Certainly. There are no questions at the moment. I do encourage our guests to either type or let me know that you'd like to ask a verbal question. You can ask questions about the TRX program. You can ask questions about the super session, the main program, which is the responses to the call for proposals, or you can ask our speakers anything about what they've presented today. Please feel free to do so. Richard, what would you say for the, say, main program of the HPA Tech Retreat UK? What's the flavor there? Is there a particular focus, or is that more general?
We had an overwhelming response to our call for proposals, and it became pretty clear that there was some standout topics. Virtual reality clearly was in there, but alongside that, we had some pretty obvious things that people were interested in discussing, including cloud technologies, artificial intelligence and machine learning, which actually we've got quite a lot going on in that particular area across very different parts of the media industry. So we'll be covering a lot of that. And looking at like the glue that sticks those things together, so connectivity, technologies and so on. And of course there's stuff that people are really kind of getting right into now, things like high dynamic range, IP broadcast solutions and so on. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the call for proposals and where that led us to, these seem to be things that people are interested in. I had a question actually about the VR side of things. Obviously, there's a big focus at the moment on 360 VR and immersive VR in a headset. This is to Nick and Mary Luke. Where do you see this going in terms of augmented reality and then, you know, on into mixed reality?
I think I think that there's a lot of really good work happening today in the VR space that fundamentally will be needed to have a good library of content when augmented reality and mixed reality start to hit the mainstream. I think that it sort of becomes that when you can do, you know, your throughout the day use of augmented reality, similar to the way that you use your phone, with the ability to go full immersion and take it into that sort of virtual reality experience space. So I think that there's no bad work being done. I think that it will all be of use at some point. And virtual reality allows us a very powerful medium to play around in that space in, and realistically, outside of nailing some of the positional and environmental tracking stuff, at that point it's really about taking things away, right? So if we do a bang up job on virtual reality, then we can start taking away some of the components of that virtual reality and overlay those augmented sort of elements in our everyday existence. So, you know, some people seem to think that there's going to be one solution or the other. I think it's going to be a blend of solutions, and you know, all of the VR work and the AR work that's being done today will support the other in its inception.
Yes.
We do have a few questions in the queue. Oh, I'm sorry, Mary Luke.
No, just quickly to add to what Nick said, from a standardization point of view, AR and mixed realities, they're not ignored. It's just that there was very high pressure to bring standards on VR. And then the next step is obviously AR and mixed reality, but there was too much pressure and to bring technology for VR in the short term.
Okay, thank you. Our first question is from Paul. Paul asks, under human factors, what is the VR industry forum specifically doing to address the issue of VR motion sickness?
Okay, so the work on human factors has started recently. The first thing that is done is to identify what are the different criteria that can impact the motion sickness, for instance. And then the intention is to produce guidelines on how to create content and distribute content in a way that will have less impact on human factors. Mm-hmm. It's a very tricky topic. It also has some medical aspects of it, but we have a few experts as well in the VR industry forum that can help with that. But it's a very different technical area for sure.
And it's not fun to test.
I bet. Next question from John. And I'm not going to ask you to make recommendations as we don't. But he's interested in what video editing software is out on the market.
This is a question we are asking ourselves as well. It's not your traditional sort of players in the space. And while I'm not promoting any product, it seems currently like the two pieces of software that are the furthest ahead are Final Cut and Premiere at the moment in terms of editing 360 video. I want to be clear though that there's a big distinction between some of these 360 videos that you're seeing and the full immersive material that we speak of a bit, and sort of drawing some of those lines is part of what we intend to cover during the actual HPA session. But yeah.
Okay. Speaking of 360 and virtual reality, I've read an article, and this may be a religious discussion, I think, but the article claimed that 360 video is not VR. I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
This seems to be a little bit of a religious debate. You know, it really depends on your interpretation, I think, of the meaning. Mm-hmm. A 360 video for me has the ability to put me in another place. So for me, that is a virtual reality experience. That presence component and being not in the room where you put on the headset throughout the experience, to me, implies a virtual reality kind of component. But I do agree that there's a lot missing there, the embodiment stuff, not having your hands and your body in the experience is a little troubling and can take away from that presence component for sure. So I suppose it may be kind of dependent on your level of sensitivity and your ability to go full immersion and to touch that sort of component of presence that determines whether or not it's a virtual reality experience for you or not. But I've been moved there. I call it VR, even though it is a 360 video.
I mean, I'd say that I've seen plenty of 360-degree videos that make me want to take the headset off. And at that moment, if I'm not engaged, it's hard to argue that I don't think that's real, because otherwise, why would I take the headset off? I don't do well with horror, so horror VR experiences for me feel too real. I'm not into it. So I think 360-degree video can be VR, and it's not religious. It's just a case of the quality of the experience impacting your immersion.
Okay, great. Frederick says, I would suggest 360 video in 2D is not VR, his opinion. Okay, so next question comes from Christine. Mary Lou, could you talk about the interest in VR, AR for your customers? Is it a topic that comes up frequently?
You mean VR, AR and standardization?
Talk about interest from various customers out in the public, I think.
Okay, I think Nick is in a better position than me to answer that, because I'm dealing with the standardization on VR.
Yeah, and I can tell you that there's a tremendous amount of interest. One of the reasons why we set up the tech was to give people kind of a safe place to come in and get in a headset and really take their time to feel out the medium and understand sort of what it means. And this is everybody from the creative community to the technical community to some of our artistic community. Technicolor has over 3,500 artists worldwide that have been working in this sort of 2D space for a very long time. And from every point in the chain, from our technology vendors to our creative customers to our artistic sort of talent base, there's a tremendous amount of interest around VR. There's a tremendous amount of hype around it as well, though, because there's so much VR buzz. There is a little bit of needing to sort of ask whether or not what you're trying to do is appropriate for VR, given the complexity and the challenges associated with creating the material there. So, there's a little bit of a line that you have to walk when talking to people, because the interest level is so high. Sometimes it can sort of cloud reality. And while I'd never want to discourage somebody from doing a piece in virtual reality, sometimes at the moment, given the difficulty and the complexity surrounding it, you still need to ask yourself whether this is something you want to do, if it's really going to be meaningful in that space.
Sure. One of the organizations that kind of views, analyzes activities in the industry has this hype curve. Richard, I think I learned that from you, actually. Where along that hype curve do you think we are with VR?
The trough of disillusionment, I think they call it.
It is. Right now, that's exactly where it is. But interestingly, just after that comes the product maturity or the technology maturity. Sure. And that's where we're reaching with VR. What you'll find at the moment is that augmented reality, along with a few technologies that I think people are taking very seriously in the industry, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, software-defined everything. And I'm not just talking about networks, but everything, like your home is software defined. It's those things are right up at the peak now of inflated expectation. and are about to drop into the trough of disillusionment. I think VR has been there firmly for some time. That means people have somewhat got over. I think a lot of enthusiasm is around people who maybe didn't take it seriously and are realizing this is a real industry and they have to take that seriously. And so, but we've gone through a pretty big phase of learning about it, and things are changing very rapidly. I think, Nick, it's fair to say that the stuff that we saw at the TRX in February in Palm Springs is very different, or rather what we're going to discuss at the TRX in Oxfordshire next month is very different to what we discussed in February. And we've learned a lot and moved on a lot since then. So we are moving into a time of maturity, and this is it. If you want to learn about VR and not be behind the curve, you need to kind of do it now, really. That's my feeling. How would you say, Nick?
I also think that, with sort of those other adjacencies in artificial intelligence and machine learning and the big data to support them, one of the things that I struggle with is the interface into some of those environments. And I think that VR actually has the potential to allow for a better interface and a better visualization. We keep talking about all of these, data visualization components, and we try to lay them on these 2D planes for analysis. And we live in a 3D world. Mm-hmm. We really do. And this allows us to interact with some of the data and the content that we like to interact with in a very native way. So I think that it will help with the communication and digestion and information understanding as a whole. And I think that there's a really, every interface, in my opinion, should have a good hard look at it, especially as it pertains to some of those big data and those really complex sort of things that are on the horizon.
John asked a question relating to 3D, and by the way, I should say that Frederic has followed up, says that in stereoscopic 3D it is VR. But John asks, how important is stereoscopic 3D to VR?
Personally, I think it's extremely important. Talking about the presence component and needing to provide a reality that is consistent with the one that we are used to in our everyday lives. I think that it's very important personally. Mono 360 videos, they probably have their place for a lot of things. Storytelling, it may be a little bit more challenging. Plus, you have this sort of auto stereo thing that happens when you have the 2D material presented to you in an HMD. So there's a little bit of work to be done there. That can be a little bit troubling and actually starts to make me sick.
Could you define HMD for our guests, please?
Sorry, yeah, I do that a lot nowadays. HMD is head-mounted display.
Yeah.
These are the goggles that we wear to experience VR.
Thank you. Craig has a question. Has animated VR had better success with image quality due to lower bitrate needs? And a follow-up, are there automated tools yet to detect potential motion sickness issues and how to solve? And then 3, how is VR for children being addressed differently?
Those are a lot of very big questions. Animation has advantages in a lot of different compression schemes, but also can have some disadvantages because they like to use gradients a lot. So we have the same sort of troublesome effects that we do, mainly surrounding some of the bitrate issues, I think, more than anything else when it comes to the animation. They have a little bit of an advantage in the CGI space because it's very easy to extrapolate those stereoscopic images, but depending on whether you're doing a full immersive piece, an interactive piece, or a 360 video piece, things can get really complicated really quickly because you have to deal with the whole free will thing in the interactive pieces. And then to very briefly touch on what are we doing for VR with children. Right now, we're being very cautious, is all I can say. You know, there's the vestibulo-ocular system that we're all very familiar with if we've done any research around 3D, and the vergence accommodation conflict continues to be something that we have to deal with, and until we have a solid solution for light fields and displaying these multiple focal planes on a 2D screen, I can't recommend that children spend a lot of time in VR. There is a very sensitive sort of development phase that occurs inside of the ocular system that without some of these techniques to get over some of these conflicts, it's certainly not something that I could recommend.
Okay. We still have a few questions in the queue. You gentlemen up to answering them, or?
Sure.
Of course.
They're not too difficult.
Okay.
Yeah, make them easier.
Make them easier? Okay. Craig has a follow-up question. What will the next big device advance be, RE user comfort with HMDs?
I think that the next thing we'll see is we'll probably get rid of the wires, or at least that's a real desire for me. You know, I think that the next steps we'll see are increased resolutions and a little bit less of a clunky experience because we'll start to ditch some of the wires. Beyond that, I think some of the big leaps are a little further out, and you know, something we need help with.
Okay. Richard, did you have something?
I was just thinking more on the capture side, really. I mean, I'm really excited by the potential of light field and what that can bring in terms of being able to capture the environment in a way that allows you to manipulate it after the fact and not be constrained by like a 2-camera setup for stereo or something that may not really work. And actually, I think with light field, you have the opportunity to even customize the experience for a viewer from a stereoscopic point of view. But it's a really difficult medium to capture in. So yeah, we're not there with the capture technology, but I feel that will significantly transform the user experience at the end of it, because it will be more comfortable and natural, but also we'll be able to play with the fitting the physiology of each individual viewer, which I think will go a long way to making the stereoscopic 3D experience much more palatable for people.
Okay. Let's see. Matthew asks, what does the VR industry, or how does the VR industry in general expect to monetize VR? He did ask what Technicolor intends to do as well, but I thought you might want to just speak to the industry in general.
Well, I think everybody is asking the same question, and I think that if we're just doing this for monetization, I think the goal may be wrong. I think we're so early in the technology days with a lot more work to do, that you know, the strategy around monetization these days is gaming oriented, and you know, store oriented, so that you can buy individual pieces of content from these platforms. But again, unless you're producing something that you feel has that sort of a draw to it, you have to understand this is hard work to do. So unless you're passionate about it, and again, unless you think that it's not going to be a story that can be told without VR, you know, without backing and a lot of investment, great things don't happen. You know, so we are in a space where I think that the rush to monetization is a little disheartening when we start to have the conversations about what the people's goals are at the end of the day. and don't get me wrong, I understand everybody wants to make money. But again, I think you need to look at the content and see, are you doing this for the sake of doing something in VR, or are you doing something because it should be done in VR?
Mm-hmm.
We've seen recent examples that I think point to where people could move fairly quickly towards monetization. The one that I'm thinking of is just earlier this month, the UEFA Champions League final, which was broadcast as a live stream, 360 video, but you could choose the camera position or just go for a produced one, which would give you, I think they had 9 360-degree cameras. And so you could choose where you're looking at the football game from, soccer game, for those of us joining us from the other side of the pond. And I can see a sports channel, if they get enough interest. I mean, that was a free experience. Anyone could go and see that free of charge. I think down the line, if they find there's enough interest and uptake in that, I can see a VR sports channel, or in fact a lot of them, as a pay-per-view thing. I think people would want to see, well, we've got this UFC versus boxing fight coming up between, I can't remember their names, Conor McGregor and somebody else, to a boxer and a UFC fight champion. I bet if they did a pay-per-view 360-degree on that, people would pay to view. I think people would even go out and get headsets just to see that. So I think there are opportunities there, but they need a lot of testing, experimentation to see if the market is really there. Because we saw, with 3D television, there was a rush to roll that out when really the technology wasn't right for the consumer, or that it wasn't there yet. And unfortunately, that may have, in fact, damaged that market so badly it will be a long time before it comes back, despite the fact we already have better technology for 3D TV. But it's being ignored because they went too early, too fast in many cases. So I agree. Doing it for them.
I would also add that like the media and entertainment space, people sort of come to Technicolor to explore media and kind of with a focus on the entertainment component. And again, kind of going back to what I said earlier, my favorite application in VR right now is my 3D graphing calculator, because I can take my vector fields, blow them up to the size of a building, walk around them, and get a level of focus and attention in some of my math that I've never really been able to achieve, honestly, looking at a calculator on a screen or sitting on my desk. So I think that some of the most opportune monetization opportunities that I see aren't in the media and entertainment space. They're in places like the medical fields and travel, and pick any place where you don't want to be. A coach flight on an airplane, I'll put an HMD on. I'll gladly put an HMD on. If I'm sitting at the dentist, throw a headset on me. If I'm in a hospital, let's do this. There are training opportunities. There's educational sort of possibilities. So to focus just purely on the media and entertainment space, I think would be extremely short-sighted. And where I think where I think the most monetization will come until some of these fundamental issues are worked out for the masses.
Great. We have time for only a couple more questions, but I do want to say that Barbara Lang posted, sounds like an excellent program. Thanks, guys. Let's see. Next question. What's the current state of live linear 360 VR transmission of VR over fiber or satellite at the moment? Did that make sense?
Yeah, so there is one of the issues live VR on broadcast is the bitrate of bandwidth issue. If we're talking about broadcast VR, you have to understand that you need to send the whole VR space on the broadcast because the users will possibly look at different regions. So you need to send everybody the full VR 360 content. And if you want to do it with high quality, then it's a lot of bandwidth. At the same time, it's understood that the VR content would probably won't go for more than 15, 20 minutes long, because after that, then the motion sickness will probably kick in. So there is a commercial issue here, because we're talking about using some pretty expensive bandwidth, using lots of it just for 15, 20 minutes, where this bandwidth could be used, for instance, with traditional television services. So the issue is really about how commercially viable is the use of bandwidth.
Okay. And I think our final question will be from Frederic. How important is far lens distortion correction when shooting live action?
Very. Probably the best way to put it.
Very important. Okay.
I would say so.
I second that.
I think it has a bigger impact because you don't have an opportunity to see anything else. You know, when you look at something on a flat screen, the world's geometry is around you, so your brain can deal with the fact that the geometry of what you're seeing on the flat screen is not right, and actually you accommodate it somewhat more readily because of that. When you're in VR, there's nothing else to look at. So your brain sees, well, it doesn't even see it. You don't consciously see it, but you notice it and you know it's not right. So my personal view is it's massively important, but I'm not doing the work that Nick and Mary Luke are doing with real hands-on, so defer to them on that one.
Yeah.
I do have to tell you that even before you went into your explanation, Frederic, he typed back thanks.
Okay.
Initial very response.
Another important issue with live VR is that if you are producing a standalone live VR service, it's already complicated. But if now you want to have this service synchronized with the traditional media stream, then it's a real havoc, because the creation of the VR content takes longer than the traditional content, but you don't want to pause the traditional content either. So the synchronization of the two is a real issue. And seamless switching between one and another is also a terrible issue.
Good. And with that, we've reached the top of the hour. So I'd like to thank Richard, Mary Luke, and Nick for speaking, and thank our guests for joining us today. I put up a slide that gives you information about where you can get more information about not only the TRX on VR, but also the Super Session program and the main program, which is the response to the call for proposals. If you have not registered, do not miss this event. Please register. So thank you, everybody. Take care, safe travels, and I think our speakers are looking forward to seeing you in the UK.